Everybody, or actually good afternoon everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. We have I don't think I've seen 27 people attend a meeting, which is a testament to, I think, the level of importance that colleagues are placing upon understanding the SEN strategy developing across the council at the moment. I'd like to take a few minutes just to give a little bit of background to why we are having this meeting, and a few minutes to describe how I'm hoping the meeting will flow, and then I'll pass across to Sal, who will broadly guide us over the next period of time. I don't believe there's previously been an extraordinary meeting of School Forum, so a little bit of a first in that respect. The background to the meeting is that several years ago, funding for education in local authorities was divided and ring-fenced into a number of blocks. There's an early years block, a schools block, and a high needs block. The upshot of that ring fencing was that income that came into that block could only be spent in that block. Unfortunately, the annual expenditure across the high needs block for the last 2 or 3 years has been quite significantly greater than the income that the local authority have received to pay for that high needs block expenditure. And as we started this financial year, so in April 20, our deficit on the high needs block was in the order of £3 million. Sadly, as we are heading towards the end of this financial year, we're approaching a deficit of some £6 million. So we've gone from a deficit of 3 to a deficit of almost 6 in the space of 12 months. As disappointing as those numbers may sound, they're not a significant surprise, in that when we started the year, our formal planning recognised that there was almost certainly going to be a 2 million plus deficit on the block. So we were expecting a number that was going to be sadly not balanced. Costs during the year have continued to increase greater than our plan, and the challenges that have been associated with COVID have meant that some of the mitigation programs that Sal and the team had hoped would be put into place during 2021 have of necessity have had to have been sidelined and have not been included, unfortunately, therefore further causing a deterioration in the expenditure and therefore the deficit that we will have at the end of this year. Allied to that quite parlous financial position, there's been a growing concern across the borough that the SEN arrangements and the relationships with primary schools and secondary schools and other settings as to how SEN functioned was becoming a little blurred or a little confused. And we've had comments from senior leaders across schools, from governors, from parents, and from specialists in the sector to try and get a better understanding on how SEN and the schools sector, how it could work better together. Carol and Sal have known and felt this for a period of time, and a strategy or a program to drive a new strategy had been put in place at least a year or so ago. And it has probably been more the challenges of COVID aligned to some other capacity issues that have meant that they haven't been able to develop it at the pace at which they had wanted to develop it. School Forum has tried to keep up with the changes that are being proposed, but it has been very much like having a jigsaw puzzle, having the pieces of a jigsaw but without the picture. Whilst we could look at each of those pieces individually and pass comment, it was fairly difficult for us to understand how they were going to fit within the overall strategy, and hence the requirement for us to pull out of the normal School Forum sessions, where we had a 15 to 20 minute session each meeting, and have some dedicated time devoted to this important topic. What I'm hoping to do for today's meeting is to, in a few minutes, pass across to Sal and his colleagues to take us through the documents that hopefully most of you had a chance to read. Before we do that, there are little bits and pieces just to try and explain how I'm hoping that the session will work. Start by saying thank you to Sal and Lynn and the colleagues for preparing the, 80 odd pages of report that we have been able to use as the background to today's meeting. For those of you that may not know, a number of the senior leaders from School Forum helped me prepare a list of questions and requests for data and information, which we passed across to Sal and the team. Some of those, or several of those questions and requests for data are embedded in the documents that we've got. There are some which are not, but we can look at those as we go through the meeting today. I would be very, very surprised, in fact, I think it unlikely that today's meeting is going to generate an answer of any form. We're really on the start of a journey where School Forum is learning more about the strategy and understanding the financial implications, the piece for which we as School Forum are responsible, understanding the financial implications of that strategy as it is evolving. The next intermediate stage for us is a high needs block budget for 21-22 needs to be signed off towards the end of the first quarter of 2021. But I think that will only be a first step as we move towards a much better understanding of the strategy and, by implication, the financial plan that underpins that strategy over the next few years. Today is likely to end up giving us more questions than necessarily answers. And although Sal will take us through, he and his colleagues will take us through the reports, I'm anticipating that we will end up with a vast number of questions which we will then have to collate and work back to get answers for. Some of those questions may be answered immediately on this session, with one of the colleagues being able to give good answers. I anticipate quite a lot will be unlikely to be able to be answered immediately. We will make a note of those questions and we will consolidate them, share them with Sal, and probably look towards getting some written answers back to those questions. And our consolidation will just be to ensure that we're not duplicating lots of questions and that we're making sure that we understand what's behind them. And I'm sure there will also be questions that are as much strategic guidance by asking questions. Those we will also collate and share with Sal, so that as the strategy is further developed, there is an opportunity to build in the questioning or the guidance or the support or the feedback that colleagues on the call and from outside the call want to share as that strategy develops. So I'm anticipating we are likely to end up with three types of questions: immediate questions we can answer now, questions that Sal and the team will answer in writing over the next period of time, and more strategic feedback stroke questions which will feed into the further development of the strategy as it crystallises within the local authority. I'm aware that there is quite a significant interest in this subject outside of the members of School Forum, i.e. other school leaders across the borough. What I'd like to suggest is that those school leaders who are not, or anybody to be honest who's interested in feeding back into this, who are not on the call and therefore are unable to ask questions during this session, if they could feed back through Ginny as the chair of the Secondary Heads Federation, through Brian in his role for primary clusters, and Brian, if you could pick up early years and lower as well, I'd be grateful. I can't see Ian or any of the other early years colleagues on the call, forgive me. And Sarah J, if you could pick up the more specialist expert SEN feedback, please. And if the four of you could feed back through Luciana and I your questions from colleagues who are not part of this meeting, we can then feed those back through to Sal, and hopefully we will gather the interests and questions that colleagues who are both listening publicly and those that are participating in the meeting will be able to ask. My expectation is that we will generate these questions for Sal, we'll share them with him. Depending upon the content of those, there is likely to be a further meeting. I'm guessing it will be during Q1, where we again explore the continuing involvement of the strategy. And it's possible that we may well, from within School Forum, try and identify a task and finish group to have that financial hat on to work with Sal and the team, so that there is a more direct feedback of the financial numbers side of the strategy into the area that is our responsibility, which is effectively approving the high needs block budget for each of the forthcoming years. So forgive me for taking a few minutes to try and outline the background to that. I'd be grateful, please, and I can see that nearly everybody is, if you could be muted in terms of your microphone. I'm watching on screen for people's hands going up, your virtual hands going up, and we'll obviously ask you and welcome your contribution. And also, if you want to go, I can see Carol already. I'll come back to you in a second, Carol. I will also, if you'd like to come through on video when you've got your point to make, obviously you're more welcome to do that as well. So, Carol, you've got a point you'd like to raise before we...
Thank you, Paul. I've just put a message in the chat just to reiterate what you're saying, which is when we've got all the feedback, we'll set up a meeting where I will be present as well to review that as a first step. And then, as you described, we'll set out a timeline for the further action, just in case people haven't picked it up in the chat.
Thank you very much. Further questions, and assuming Luciana is happy that side of things are running well and the video recording is working properly, then Sal, if I can pass across to you, please. We've got until 2 o'clock. I'm hoping that it will flow well, but forgive me if occasionally I'm suggesting that in the interest of time, we just pull back a little bit from an area, put a pin in it and move on as appropriately as we can.
Absolutely. And thank you, Paul, and good afternoon, colleagues. So it'd be really helpful to kind of Tracy or start with just a very quick overview of how we're going to approach the delivery of the report. So as Paul said, he shared with us a number of areas that colleagues had asked that we start to explore and requested various elements of information under those areas. What we've tried to do is provide a single report, so I do apologise for its length, but a single report that responds to those areas, and wherever we've been able to very quickly pull together the particular detail that colleagues are requesting, that's in there. And as Paul has said, we've got an agreement that anything that you wish us to follow up on, we will be providing in terms of a kind of further either written response after this meeting, or if we're able to respond to things in meeting, of course we will do so. So what we're going to look to cover is give you a greater understanding of some of the more detail around the activity that takes place beneath the figures that we see each time we go into Schools Forum. And as Paul says, when we have that 20-minute session on each of our agendas, that it only really enables us that opportunity to give the very high level information around what's necessitated change in terms of the figures, but hasn't given us the opportunity to really talk to what's the breadth and wealth of activity that's been going on and continues to go on in terms of us responding to the pressures on the high needs block. Part of that's through the SEND strategy, part of that's through the written statement of action, and also part of that is around our broader plans going forward over the next 12 months as we start to move from development into real implementation of some of the actions. It is, concerning to us that we haven't been able to deliver on some of this in the same expediency as we would have wished to, but as been alluded to, the pandemic context has had a particular impact on some of these areas of work. So I just want to reassure colleagues that it's never left our agenda, but unfortunately it has impacted on some of the timeliness that we had originally started to be thinking about in terms of delivery. As we go through the report, I'm going to call on colleagues to take us through in terms of key elements, because we've got colleagues with us today that have been the driving force of some of the development activity and our work towards things like our SEND strategic plan, and we'll then start to move towards the end to give a bit more detail around some of the number crunching, so the financial elements of it. And I thought it was really, really important that you hear from those that are leading and driving these areas of work, both so that you have a sense of who it is and a point of contact, but also so that it's really, really clear that it's a transparent sharing of what's going on. It's not a watering down as the message comes through and then disseminates out. So hopefully, by the end of our input, there will be plenty of time to respond to questions or to receive comments and questions that we may then have to take outside of the meeting and then report back to colleagues. So that's hopefully the kind of approach that we're going to take through it. So I'll now ask Lynn if she wouldn't mind sharing her screen so that we can get into the paper that's been presented for this meeting.
Yeah, just trying to do that as usual. Technology is not playing the way it should be. 1 second.
Okay, so just again that reminder that whilst the paper as it's presented in terms of the agenda suggests it's just reporting to points 3.1 or B.2 on the agenda, it actually encapsulates all of the areas of the agenda that had been requested of us.
Sorry folks, technology has let me down at the last minute. Catherine, can you try sharing the pack, please? Sorry. We had this all well tested before we started the meeting and Teams is now not letting me share anything. Apologies all.
Carol, did you want to come in?
Just to say that Teams has been updated today, so I think that's possibly why we're having a few glitches. We all had a bit of a false start trying to log in this morning, so it may be that, Lynn.
Oh, thanks, Carol. We had worked through stuff before the meeting, but now I can't. Apologies all.
Is Catherine able to
I'm just getting there.
share her screen with us?
Oh, thank you, Catherine. You're a star. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. If we can scroll down, so if we move to kind of point 4 first, so in terms of kind of wanting to give a very brief summary of what's gone on, certainly in so far over the last 12 months in respect of the SEND improvement work and the work on the written statement of action. As colleagues will be aware, there were kind of 6 key areas in relation to our written statements of action and the action plan that was put together in terms of the improvement around that. In order that we kind of deliver against those areas, we set up the SEND Improvement Board and a number of task and finish groups in order to really dig deep into what are the areas of improvement that we'd identified and develop the activity that needed to happen in order to respond to that. First of the area, or first area in terms of kind of performance, in terms of how we started to move forward, is in respect of the timeliness and quality of our education, health and care plans. Wokingham had for a long period of time not been performing at all in terms of timeliness and quality of education, health and care plans, and for quite a few months had not been achieving any finalisations within the statutory timeframes. So if we take, for example, January of this year, we were meeting 12% of the EHCPs in terms of turning those round within the 20-week deadline. And at that time, we were also concerned about the quality of them. You know, sustainably over the last 6 months, we've seen our timeliness performance being maintained in excess of, 60% of our EHCPs being turned around within the time frame. We've held multi-agency audits seeking to look at the quality of our EHCPs and to understand that what we're not doing is just rushing things through, that actually they are meaningful and are of high quality, and that we are seeing the better engagement across all of the key partner components that contribute to a child's EHCP, because one of the deficits was also that our plans were just educational focused and there wasn't a health or social care footprint anywhere to be seen. That has radically shifted. So we've done a whole load of work with the partners around looking at health in terms of turning around the health assessments and making sure that health assessment information is provided in a way that is understandable both to parents and carers, but also to SEND officers that aren't medical officers, in order that they can then support the development of the plans in a way that it's accessible for families, and similarly with our social care colleagues. So that's been a really big piece of sustainable change that we're seeing, and we are working on our targets to see how we can continue to improve that performance from the 60% up into the 90s and 100% over the course of the next 12 months. In terms of SEND strategy, and not wishing to steal colleagues' thunder a bit later on, is that we did deliver a published SEND strategy, but we were acutely aware that actually it didn't tie into other areas of our strategic thinking in relation to co-production, and also it didn't seem to stretch us as far as we wanted to be stretched in Wokingham. So we took an immediate decision through the SEND Improvement Board that although we had published the strategy in line with the written statement of action outcome, we would actually spend the time over the last 12 months to co-produce a new SEND strategy that builds on the one that is published, but actually stretches us further and is clearer about our shared stakeholder intent for Wokingham as a system. We are incredibly close, and we're hoping that in January, so in the new year, we will be in a position to sign off and start to implement and embed a new co-produced SEND strategy. Again, we'll look at that in slightly more detail as part of the agenda. Co-production, as I've just mentioned, was a key agenda for us, and we have delivered, and the task force has delivered on the development of not just a document, but a way of working around co-production and a way in which we can hold ourselves accountable to co-production at both a strategic level, but also at that individual operational level, that working with parents and carers on plans and the co-production that's absolutely essential there, as well as the co-production and the key stakeholder engagement at that more senior level. In order to develop that, we've been doing the work around our multi-agency working arrangements. Predominantly, we have looked to the support of the joint implementation group of the CCG, so that we can be learning from activity that's taken across West Berkshire rather than just Wokingham, but making sure that what we do is refined to the Wokingham context. So we're looking at a whole raft of things, including multidisciplinary and multi-agency training directories and how we can share that training more effectively across partnerships. That we're looking to develop our working together meetings, which is about how we work across agencies around individual young people much earlier on to understand the service need and the potential trajectories for those children going forward, so that we have a better understanding. We're working on our demand management arrangements. So again, we can understand what modelling is coming through in terms of needs, so that we can make sure that we are in advance planning to meet those sorts of needs, and therefore not constantly in that phase of knee-jerk reaction, which is often high cost. And then the final element was around the preparation for adulthood, because all of the work that we need to do throughout the SEND agenda needs to be supporting children in the immediacy, but also be minded to those children and young people as they meet and reach adulthood, and being clear about that transition from children into adulthood, both in terms of their experience, but also in terms of things like the legislative frameworks, which we know are much, much more generous as children to adults. So we want to ensure that that young people, as they reach adulthood, are not meeting a cliff edge, but their pathways are clearly identified and again are co-produced with their parents and carers as they reach that adulthood maturity. So a whole raft in terms of developing the pathway and developing materials that we share with parents and carers has taken place in respect of preparation for adulthood. So in terms of kind of that overarching update of the written statement of action, we know that there's been a whole host of activity that's undertaken, some of which has resulted in improved performance, and some of which is now at the point at which we can start to deliver and embed. So we will be looking to change the auspices of the SIB to move from one which is around the development of a response to our improvement need to one which is much, much more about the monitoring of the implementation and the impact of all of these areas of work on children and young people's lives. And that will also obviously include our eye to the resources that are there to support those children, young people and plans. So hopefully that gives you an overview of what's been going on through the SEND Improvement Board and the written statement of action. So we've got,
thank you.
Carol's hand's gone up.
Yeah.
Thank you. So just to move on from what Sal is saying, we've had a very difficult year with COVID. Everybody's had a difficult year, you know, and you guys in particular in terms of the pressures that have been put on schools. So we had to take a decision back in sort of April, May, how we were going to progress this plan, the written statement of action and the SIB board, in a very, very different landscape. So at that point, I commissioned Matthew Booth to join our team to undertake particularly the SEND strategy, but also helping us to do some work in terms of our homeschool transport arrangements, particularly for our children with SEND. Just for reassurance, because I know it's been asked before, and as Sal has said, there is a shift in the emphasis of the SIB board moving forward. Matthew will be facilitating a workshop late January, early February, looking at systems leadership and changing the terms of reference of the SIB board to implementation rather than strategic planning, because I think we're at that point where we need to change the emphasis, and all the system and partnerships need to adjust to a change in that. And I will be keeping both Matthew and Dan on as supporting us into implementation for a further 12 months. And there's a programme of work that we have developed that I'll be writing out to heads, if I can at all possible, later today. If not, it'll be Monday that you'll receive the detail of that and the timeline. And there are some other additions to that in relation to some ideas that we had a meeting with Shirley today from Forest as well, in relation to how we will strengthen that. But just for some reassurance, because I know it's been asked that, you know, people have felt that there's been a little bit more injection even during COVID, to let you know that that will continue, and the local authority is committed to that commissioning and that extra resource in relation to making sure that we take this forward and don't go backwards. I just wanted to say that at this point.
Thank you, Carol. Ginny, you've got a hand raised.
Yes, good afternoon. I could not be more delighted to hear that we've got two people joining the team who I hope will have a palpable and an exceptional impact, I'm quite sure. In terms of the first few pages of the report, I am a bit disturbed, if I'm honest, because if I were to pick some of the phrases in the first few pages, there's words like dramatically improved, a fantastic achievement, continued progression and momentum. And whilst I don't want to decry some steps like timeliness of ECHPs, it doesn't ring true to my own experience and the experience of the feedback received by officers in the forums of Secondary Federation or the SEND Improvement Board. And so I'm sort of slightly disturbed to see that sort of shaping of the present position.
Sal, do you want to come in and give the context of the phraseology in relation to that aspect? Because I think it's got to be given the context. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that one of the things that we wanted to recognise is that the starting point for where we were 12, 18 months ago was so low in terms of both performance, in terms of understanding, and in terms of some of the relationship across the whole SEND system, that actually where we feel we find ourselves now is actually quite a significant shift in terms of where we are now. That is by no means seeking to suggest that it's job done and that we don't recognise that we still have a lot of work collectively to continue to improve and respond to. But taking, for example, that certainly Wokingham, in terms of its DHCPs, and it's a really good example, was sitting on performance of 0 for almost a year prior to us starting this programme of work, and for the last 6 months has been sustained at above 65%, which it performs better than national, southeast region and statistical neighbours. I would suggest is quite a dramatic shift. Similarly, there was no sense of, or palpable sense of, co-production. And we are now in a position where we have a clearly articulated arrangement across the system and a charter that holds us all to account around how we co-produce, the way in which we work, which again, I think is quite a significant move forward. Again, you know, absolutely reiterate that we know that there are areas that we need to continue to develop and improve. So this is not certainly the end of the journey and us articulating through the use of language that we think it's job done. But at the same time, I think we do need to recognise that the system has moved forward. You know, this isn't, when we talk about things like co-production or when we talk about things like EHCP timeliness, that's not local authority speak for look how well we've done, because actually it's the system that has responded to this challenge in order to make those improvements happen. So what we wanted to really articulate and get a sense of is that, you know, the significant shift that the whole system, that the strategic partnership and our key stakeholders have made in terms of improving things. And again, I don't want to shy away from what I believe to be quite a dramatic shift in where, when I came in 12 months ago, what I saw in terms of performance and the engagement of the system to be able to move things forward. And so I think that's why that type of language is in there. I'm really, really sorry if that's not the individual experience of settings. And I know that we've had numbers of conversations around the areas of continual improvement that we need to look to. And again, we will be reflecting on that, as Carol mentions, in terms of the letter that she's hoping to send either today or on Monday, around there are, you know, very, very clear improvement areas that we need to respond to, which we have heard, and we are looking to do so. So I think that's why that language is in there.
Thank you, Sal. As Ginny started, I think the approach of recognising improvement and using language that encourages colleagues to go further down along that journey is great. You know me, I'm a numbers person, so I'm sure I can sit down and look at figures and see what the improvements have been. Do you have a programme of softer engagement with stakeholders so that not only are we able to understand numerically it has moved from X to Y, but also potentially ask stakeholders to share with us in a softer language their perception of improvement? So Carol, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. Yes, that'll be in my letter. So that's the plans for that. That's the next 12 months, if you like. Is, you know, we had a lot to have to change, and we've concentrated our efforts in areas where we needed to attend to from a written statement of action perspective. That hasn't addressed all the systems issues and all the issues that schools particularly have been concerned about, because we can't do everything all at once. You know, there's a lot of work that needs to be addressed. We absolutely know that. We were starting from a very, very, very low base. So we want to celebrate for those people that have done all that hard work to get us from where we were to where we are. That does not at all say we are where we need to get to. We still have a mountain to climb to where we need to get to, but it shouldn't take away from the fact that going from 0% of educational, health and social care plans, for example, 0% for a period of significant time, to huge efforts that Sal, myself and others have done to get us away from that into a position that we think is sustainable and better than national and better than the Southeast. So and then we've had COVID, which of course none of us could have, you know, factored in. So we haven't used that as a kind of, you know, reason for saying, well, you know, we're not as far ahead as we are. But of course it's a factor. It's a factor in that we've had to, for example, we were doing a lot of work with Sarah and Jay about a year ago now in relation to and Ginny and others in relation to inclusion and thinking about schools for a learning partnership. We've had to let some things sit and not pay absolute attention to them, both for time that heads have needed to spend in relation to what they've been dealing with COVID and with what we as a local authority were dealing with. So I think we've all got to give ourselves a bit of a break to say we've been working in unprecedented circumstances. I know that's an overused phrase, but it is true. And we have not taken our eye off the ball. I could have taken a view of just writing out to partners back in March and saying we've hit by COVID, everything's on hold for 9 months, writing to the DFE and saying the same. We didn't. What we did was we brought people in to make sure we didn't lose momentum. But of course, we've got much, much more to do, and we absolutely recognise that. And that needs to be done in partnership. So we will be setting up a half-termly working group to absolutely take the intelligence in as it's live, so that we can work on issues as they get raised with us, and we can work in partnership in relation to the solutions, because the solutions don't sit just with the local authority. or just with schools community. They sit with us both. And we've got to continue to work together with these really significantly difficult issues to get to where we need to get to. And we've now got, additional resources. We've got a clear plan of delivery, and that's our intention, to deliver significant impact in this next 12 months. Thank you.
Okay. Then, as we look forward, Sal, are you going to move on to the overview and strategy?
I absolutely was, Paul, and I was actually going to hand over to Matthew Booth, who is one of the colleagues that Carol says that we invited in to really support us on the facilitation of the development of this strategy. You know, I mean, Matthew will tell you he hasn't written it, he's facilitated it and brought it together, and it's very much a partnership. But I'm not one to steal his thunder, so I'm going to hand over to Matthew now.
And sorry, Sam, just so that I can make sure that we've got the timings roughly right, we will then get an opportunity to look at each of the main sections within your current position and potentially the 4 strands that you have of the strategy as we move on during the meeting, yes?
Absolutely. So colleagues will have the opportunity to file comments, ask questions in relation to where we currently are, as I've kind of articulated a little bit in terms of the written statement of action, but also where we're going in terms of the strategy as drafted at the moment.
Thank you. Matthew, floor's yours.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, Sal. And I am conscious of time, and I'm conscious of the size of this agenda. So what I propose to do, with permission, is if I share on my screen the version of the document that was submitted to you with the papers, what I propose to do is a very quick whistle-stop tour of the key areas of the strategy, and then in the discussion I'm very happy to pick up in more detail on any aspect that people feel is particularly interesting and relevant to them, if that sounds like a good approach, because I bet about 80 of the 80 pages, about 40 of them would have been this strategy, so going through it line by line is probably not that practical. But what I will do is I will just share on my screen the version that was submitted round, and I'll call attention to some key aspects. Hopefully colleagues can see that on the screen, hopefully. Okay, so to pick up on what Sal and Carol have said, yet a huge amount of work has gone into this over the course of the last 6 months in particular. Partners from across education, health, social care, the SEND team, Parent Carer Forum, and it has been a pleasure but a considerable challenge to facilitate that discussion. And what I wanted to present today is where we've got to so far with this, and then explain what some of the next steps for it might be, so that colleagues on the call are aware of those as well as we move forward to the next version of this draft. And I do emphasise it's a draft. It's great that we've got the opportunity to have this discussion and this conversation today, because we're looking to move into the next version of this documentation. The ink is definitely not dry on this plan yet. So thoughts and feedback and comments either today or in subsequent discussions, definitely very, very welcome. So just to give you a bit of an overview to the structure, we start off by talking about the needs analysis. So I'm not going to go into that in terrific detail, because I think a lot of what follows in this meeting will pick up on some of the numbers, etc., that drives this. But it was very important to us to start the strategy with an overview of what the data is telling us, both qualitative and quantitative, in terms of what the needs are in the local area and what the trends of those needs are in the local area. And right at the start of the strategy is a summary of the needs analysis, which we have included as an appendix in detail. So if you do like numbers and you do like charts and you do like graphs, there are quite a few in there. There's even more now in there in the evolving draft that we've been working on since this paper was submitted. But essentially, we wanted to provide an executive summary, really, of that needs analysis at the start to show some of the key messages that are coming forward through the analysis and through the consultation that we're doing. And a lot of that is absolutely not going to be news at all to the people on this call, because it's largely about increasing trends and levels and volumes of certain types of need, SEN need, the need for plans and the need for support, and also increasing complexity of that need and the nature of the need changing over the course of the last few years and predicted to continue to evolve into future years, which, given the challenges that laid out at the start by Paul and others, around what we do in terms of financial planning around that, that does introduce quite a lot of complexity for us to collectively get our heads around. But essentially, we sort of look back over the last 3 years from 2017 to 2020 data in the main, and we're sort of looking at the increasing volumes, the increasing trends in EHCPs. We're looking at the disproportionate increases in those relative to the actual increases in population. So there is actually something around a disproportionate levels of increase in need related to SEN within Wokingham. We start to pinpoint where certain key stages and certain age groups start to feel those pressures in need in particular. For example, we talk about the increasing pressures at the early years and at key stage 1 level, but then also the significant bulges in demand and pressures on support that start to work their way through into key stage 2 in particular as well. And again, we're doing trends in the needs analysis to show, well, actually, if this trend continued into the next few years, what would that look like in terms of numbers and volumes and demand and so forth, and start to try and predict and anticipate the kind of challenges we have over the life of this strategy, which is over the next 3 years. We start to talk about the natures of those needs, which is where we start talking about trends for SEMH, for ASD, for speech and language and moderate learning difficulties in particular, but it's not just limited to those categories at all. And we're now able to cut those by age group. We're now able to cut those by gender, which hasn't been included in the version that you will have received, but will be included in the draft that we move forward with for formal consultation, which I'll come on to at the end. We also talk about SEND support, not just EHCPs, but actually the broader support, the pressures that result from the upward trends in demand for that support, for example, and the challenges that result for inclusion strategy and inclusion in mainstream settings. That's very clearly marked within the data, and how those SEN needs support play out again across the different key stages. We also talk a lot about out-of-borough use and the trends in the data around out-of-borough placements and the clear need for this strategy to address the use of the out-of-borough placements, the independent sector and the non-maintained sector. Clearly, there are some issues there in terms of numbers, and clearly there are some issues there in terms of money. So we want to call very clear attention to that within this strategy in terms of setting the foundations really for what the priorities around it should be. So that's an extremely quick whistle-stop tour of about 20 pages of needs analysis, but I'm happy to go into any particular data that people would like to go into in more detail. Just to cover off on the other side, the qualitative side, excuse me, we've also wanted to make sure that the views of stakeholders, parents, carers, Ofsted, CQC are also reflected in terms of us considering what our real needs are and what our priorities for the strategy should be. So in all cases, there are some things that are picked out as positives, and it does irk me slightly when strategies are all presented as a deficit model, as in everything is absolutely terrible and we're starting from ground zero. That's not the case. There are some fantastic things happening in Wokingham. There are some fantastic services for children and young people in general. The aspiration behind this strategy is to ensure that Wokingham is a great place for children and young people with SEN. And even though there are some really good services for and some fantastically dedicated professionals and some excellent things happening in schools, for example, there's still some areas for improvement. So we play back the key messages from parents and carers in regard to that. We also play back the key findings, if you like, from the Ofsted and CQC inspection, which is not so much the written statement of action, it's actually the evidence that fed into the written statement of action, which tends to get less attention these days, but it's actually quite important in terms of what they picked out, both as areas of strength to build on, because there were some that they found, but also the significant areas for improvement, which obviously the written statements of actions tried to pick up. But we need to make sure that this SEND strategy does not miss those, because there is still a distance to travel in regards to many of those key areas within the written statement of action. Absolutely agree with Carol and with Sal, some great progress has been made, but it is far from job done. So we need to make sure that this strategy picks up on those as well. This section of the plan is one that is probably worth flagging for you. Some people on this call I know will be very familiar with this and will be thinking, oh my God, here he goes again, talking about the same thing. But for those of you less familiar, I just want to provide you with a sense of what the 4 main strategic priorities are in the plan so you can see where we're headed. So the first one is around building local provision to better meet those local needs that I referred to in the needs analysis. This is where we talk about sufficiency. This is where we talk about the consistency of local provision. This is where the work around the ordinarily available, which I know many of you will have been involved in some of those discussions around that, in terms of what should be ordinarily available within schools across the borough. This is where the project work to define that and actually embed that and support the implementation of that all sits. This is where the future strategies around inclusion and inclusion in mainstream settings also sit. Improving the value for money of that and the future strategy for in-borough special provision, and addressing particular gaps that have been fed through parents and carers to us. In particular, the two that we call out at the top level is around mental health and around transport, because those are two that significantly have come up through the engagement that we've carried out so far, but it's not just limited to that, as I'm sure you will all know. The second area pertains really to the kind of issues we were talking about earlier and that Sal was giving an overview of in his introduction, which is around how we actually do things. So delivered all of this through an efficient, effective and well-managed system. So this is about how things actually work on the ground. We call out things like transitions, actually transitions of all types, not just from young adulthood into adulthood, but between school years, for example, and between mainstream and special, embedding that graduated response across Wokingham around planning, doing and reviewing, embedding early intervention actually in the way that needs are assessed and decisions are taken. And again, the timeliness and quality of assessments also sits within there because there is further work to do. 60% is not 100%. Plot twist. I'm sure that's a real shocker for you mathematicians out there. But there's still a headroom to go between where we want to be with timeliness and quality of assessments and where we actually are, and making it easier for parents and carers to engage with services. Sometimes it feels to me from our feedback that we're making it unnecessarily difficult, I should say, for parents and carers to engage with us over how things are provided. So we really need to improve on that. The third area is around embedding co-production. Sal's mentioned a lot of that already. A charter has been developed. That's absolutely true, but it's about the forward planning that we need to do to look ahead to what activities we're actually going to be doing and think how many of these actually need to be truly co-produced. And what does co-production for those actually look like that's going to be meaningful and not kind of set up false expectations or put people's backs up in some way? So this is very much about getting co-production right at the strategic level and the individual level. And the fourth area, and then I will finish on the priorities, is around being intelligent and using the information that we actually have and know about our children, young people and our families in order to actually improve services, commission services better, and strengthen a focus on outcomes and how we measure impact on outcomes. More on that in a second. The next section of the strategy I want to call attention to, and I promise I will cover this at some pace, is around those outcome measures and how we're going to measure success of the strategy. Now, I've included in the papers that you have seen a series of proposed outcome measures that we will use to measure the success of the strategies. I should say that we've had recent focus groups with parents, carers and professionals actually on these outcome measures where we still feel there is quite a bit of work to do to get them right. There are far too many of them in there at the moment for us to be able to meaningfully measure. So it's point number one. And point number two, parents and carers feel very strongly over the focus groups we've done with them, and it'd be really interesting to get your views, that actually a few of the basics are being missed in those things, that actually it's not all about self-reported measures and I statements. There are some basic key service, key performance indicators that they would value seeing transparently reported on in this SEND strategy, because they feel that there are some service fundamentals that actually still need to improve and they should figure in the strategy. And at the moment in this draft, they don't. So I just wanted to flag that that's something that we've received through very recent consultation as of this week. The reason why some of these are highlighted in blue is because these are ones that people have picked out as being potentially particularly useful. But again, with the caveat, there are still too many of them, so we need to cut them down. Other caveats are there aren't enough there that will work for early years. That's another piece of feedback that we've had, so we need to problem solve around that. And actually, there isn't a high degree of suitability for children who might not communicate verbally, for example, in some of these things. So actually there are issues there with that as well. So we're on our way with the outcome measures and we're sort of in a good direction, I believe, but there's significant distance still to travel on that as we go forward. I'm not going to talk through the action plan in great detail because I would much rather hear if anybody has any particular points of interest. Just to say, each of those priority areas has a detailed set of actions underneath it. In the version of the draft that was submitted to you, there were only very few owners, like 1 or 2 across the whole thing. I now have a full set of owners for all of these different actions, which will feed into the next strategy that we would like to consult with partners and with the general public on. And so you will see which services and particular roles have been named as taking forward every single one of these actions. Again, that's subject to change, as it will be subject to consultation, but just to provide some reassurance, these are no longer blank. They have actually been filled in. The reason why some are coloured in pink is because the pink ones are ones that stakeholders internally so far have picked out as being priority actions. So Carol alluded to this in her introduction, but what we're starting to think about now is, once this action plan and strategy is finally complete after the consultation, how do we mobilise into programme management? How do we actually mobilise into delivery? What's the critical pathway for each of these things? What do we need to do in what order, and what is most important? So the pink areas start to give us some idea about what some of those things could be. So we have actions for each of the priorities there. And to move forward through the needs analysis, which I shan't talk through in any detail, is the data that I've referred to in length. So I could go into any particular aspect of that, but I'm aware that some of that might get picked up and later on in the agenda, actually, when we also look at the data that also reads across to likely costs. And as Carol referred to, there's a blank page at the end which relates to governance. And this reflects what Carol referred to at the moment about the thinking about the role of the SIB and other groups in helping to govern and manage delivery. Where should progress on this strategy be reported to? What, for example, does this group want to do in terms of having a role in helping to govern the delivery of this strategy? Very open to those suggestions at this moment in time. I am going to stop at this point, except to say the intention is that we will go out to a formal consultation from next week on the latest working draft that we have. It will be a draft consultation document, so it is open to change and open to views. And we are proposing to run that for 7 weeks until the end of January. So hopefully that will give colleagues some more time to help us actually shape the final written content before we move into implementation very quickly thereafter. I think I will stop there in the interest of time, Paul, if that's okay with you, and I can pick up in detail on any aspect that you would like.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for respecting time as well. I appreciate that very much. That's great. Can I, much in the same way as Ginny asked a fairly high-level question on Sal's introduction, are there any high-level questions that colleagues would like to ask Matthew at this stage, or would you want to move back to looking at the current position in detail and then towards the end of the meeting come back and see how that might play into this wider long-term strategy and the consultation process that Matthew's going for? So I'm not seeing any hands go up at the moment. So Matthew, thank you very much for that. Let's look to coming back to you at the end of the session. Sal, if we can come back to you now, please. Thank you for the overviews. If you can now take us into, for the better word, the more detailed elements of the current position.
So in terms of taking us through the next elements of the paper that details that kind of current position, I'm going to hand over to Lynn and Sonia and Richard, who will be able to take us through those components within the paper in much more detail. So I'm going to hand over to, I think if we can share the paper again, that would be really helpful, and then if Lynn and colleagues can take us through.
Thanks, Sal. Catherine is just assisting me again, helpfully, with my technical issues. She's hopefully going to pop the report back up again. Obviously, this sort of picks up in terms of the presentation of the report from section 6 onwards. we're acutely aware that in terms of when we think about conversations in schools forum, when we talk about pounds and pence, they're at a very high level. There's not been that activity detail, and that's obviously one of the things we've grappled with about how we share greater visibility of information to allow school forums roll around the finance to really understand what that looks like. Picking up, I suppose, in terms of, so from Catherine, sorry, I know I'm landing in at page 6. Thank you, if you can pop up to page 6. We're acutely aware, obviously, picking up from what Matthew's obviously just discussed and what's in the strategy. Colleagues, having read the report, will see that section 6 picks up a lot of the same information that's in the draft strategy and really tries to set the overall picture in terms of the position within Wokingham. Matthew referred to the trends that's been looked at in terms of over the last few years. What we've tried to do is to build on that, to link back to finance, to give you some more granular information. The trends, in terms of taking a snapshot in point in time, we're obviously all acutely aware we're talking about people here, we're talking about children and young people. Nothing stands still exactly day to day. A lot of the analysis has therefore been based on the annual SEND 2 returns, which is done in January each year, which gives us a clear annual point where information is collated, it's checked, it's audited, it's pulled together. It's a formal return that we do as an organisation, which has allowed us a clean data set in each year to consider. Having reflected in terms of how we make this information for the purpose of this meeting as useful as possible, we've obviously not yet got the SEND 2 return that will be done next and returned next month. We're acutely aware that in terms of the financial context, taking the SEND 2 return that was done in January 2020, we know that the position has moved on significantly. The cost base that we had in January and what we are now discussing in terms of a high needs block forecast has moved on and changed, and we therefore felt it was important to try and set the context of the current position against that data. So, Catherine, if you don't mind scrolling down to section 7 for me, what we've therefore looked to do is to take all the information that we've got in terms of the SEND 2 returns for the last 3 years, but then also take a current snapshot of position so that we can give everyone a flavour of actually what it looks like for the current academic year and where we are now, because that, for me, that's much more relevant in terms of the financial context of where we are, current year forecast, and therefore what the sort of process and the journey that we're on to then consulting with Schools Forum for the 21-22 high needs block budget. We have a number of challenges in terms of delivering that. Our biggest challenge is system-wide, the information, the activity, the demand data and the individual EHCP data from a non-financial point of view and from a SEND service point of view is managed through a particular system. As an organisation, we don't currently use, we don't have the functionality to link the finance information into that. So my team hold that separately, and that provides us some challenges in terms of being able to quickly analyse data and cut it in different ways. That's absolutely something that's recognised as an improvement, as part of the improvement programme and the work that we're doing, but has been an example of something, unfortunately, that has stalled through COVID just because the same nature of who all needs to be involved in that work. But what we have done is work through that snapshot, try and give us start to give you information. I'm aware that there's a lots of different ways we can cut this data. There may well be tables that individually you will sit and reflect and you would like to see, and they're not yet in that, they're not in the document for today. But it was really start to give a structure to start to take through that level of detail to then see, okay, what's useful in terms of moving that forward. So in the report, what we've tried to set out is a section on sort of each type of key setting area, if you like, to work through that, trying to recognise that obviously the overall analysis, when they look at the needs analysis and the work that's done on the strategy, that obviously sets out overall numbers in terms of those children and young people within EHCP, but how that maps across to the actual pounds and pence that we spend out the high needs block is obviously very different. So thinking about, so if I can move down quickly, Catherine, where you are is great. Thank you just now. When we talk about mainstream, obviously what we've tried to set out here is the fact that the overall numbers of those who with an EHCP who sit in a mainstream setting, but not all of those will have funding drawn down from the high needs block, as an example. So for each of the settings that we've types that we tried to go through, is trying to give you an indication of what the overall numbers look like, and then within that, of those that receive top-ups, for example, what that looks like and how that breaks down and how those costs are arrived at. Some of what's in there will not be news to schools forum. So, for example, how mainstream top-ups are calculated. Largely speaking, people will be aware of that, but we felt that that was important in terms of almost trying to go back to basics and trying to set out some of the information, being acutely aware of the wider audience and where everyone's understanding is, to try and ensure that was visibly set, so that we could then build on it. What I'm not proposing to do is go through necessarily all the detail in the individual tables, although obviously if there's specifics we can pick up on that later, and I'm sure there will be a range of questions where people will be interested in particular themes that's shown, and we can certainly pick that up. Catherine, if you can just scroll down very slightly for me, please. Apologies, yeah, so that, yeah, just slightly more. Thank you. But what we have tried to do, as I said, is in each section is set out. So in terms of mainstream, we've set out there in terms of how effectively a child or young person with an EHCP in a mainstream setting is funded. Talked about the three elements in terms of OPU, notional send, and then top-ups from there. The formula in terms of how we calculate top-up funding for mainstream is probably one of the key points that we wanted to flag in there. We have discussed at Schools Forum in the past the fact that rate has been set for a number of years. It hasn't been inflated or reviewed for a good number of years, and that's something that obviously in terms of mainstream settings' ability to be funded in a way that allows them to support as many children as they can within their settings, how that funding is set is obviously key. And we had reflected when we met back in March that was definitely something that was on the improvement programme for reviewing that. That work hasn't happened as yet because of stalling on the work, but that makes it no less important and no less part of our plan in terms of being able to take that forward in the new calendar year to ensure that there's real visibility on that and working through what a model might look like for Wokingham in the future. Catherine, sorry, if you can scroll down a tiny bit more. Just a little bit further. We've tried to give some information just in terms of broadly speaking what the spread of funded hours are from the top-ups that come from the high needs block. Slightly further, Catherine, for me, thank you. And then again, you'll see in each section, that's perfect, thank you. We've tried to set out where the main improvement programme actions are that are either still underway or are identified for moving forward. So for mainstream, we've obviously touched on there in terms of the review of the funding model. Absolutely key, we understand that, we know how difficult that has been for schools and the fact that it's been fixed for such a long period of time. So more work plan on that will obviously be rolled out in due course. And what we've also identified through this process and I suppose budget setting on the schools block for 21-22 is the fact that the review of the notional send factor that's actually in the schools block funding formula, that's actually something we could recommend that we can't do that now for 21-22, but actually as the schools block task and finish group move forward through next year for budget setting for 22-23, that actually a review of that local, because that's a local factor that we have in the formula, is something that we could look at with colleagues as well in terms of reviewing that to see whether that's still fit for purpose and whether there was anything that we would want to change in that. Moving on to resource spaces, Catherine, if you don't mind, thank you. So again, the same sort of format of information. We've tried to sort of give you sort of headlines in terms of cutting information by primary support need and key stage. again, through each of the setting types, you'll see we've tried to also separate out the sort of overall picture and then what the out of borough looks like, because obviously I know that's one of the key considerations of how we target that, what we understand about that, to be able to ensure in future where we can that those children and young people are supported within borough. So for resource bases, as an example, there's obviously the breakdown there that shows that, you know, the small number that sit in other local authority resource bases. On current funding arrangements, Catherine, if you don't mind, thank you. Again, just try to set out the same information in terms of the 3 elements that make up funding for an individual within EHCP who's placed in a resource base, and where that comes from. And then there's some further information in terms of actually the process in terms of how we as a local authority are required to commission places in terms of resource bases, the complexity of the formula that sits behind that. The DFE adjusts for a number of things through our high needs block, where there are places in our resource bases that are taken by pupils from other local authorities, and then a little bit more about how top up funding currently works, and the sort of the issues I suppose we're grappling around empty places. Can I, at this point, just bring in Richard, if that's okay, just to pick up more specifically? Obviously, we've talked about in this meeting before around the resource-based review and that moving on, and that's obviously drives the key improvement actions within this section. So, Richard, if you don't mind, could you pick up?
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. Yeah, just to say that this is another area that started some considerable time ago and was significantly impacted by the COVID situation. There have also been a number of staffing changes as well, which has meant that different people have become involved in this. Initially, schools were involved at the beginning of this process about a year ago, and were party to exactly how the financial review was going to be undertaken. And I think we recognise that perhaps they haven't been kept as up to speed as they should have been, just because of all the other things that were going on. But what we've done as we've picked this up is we've had individual meetings with all of the schools that are involved in current resource-based provision, explain to them where we're up to and what we're doing and how we've picked all of this up and where we're trying to get to. And where we're trying to get to is, as you'll see on the screen in front of you, there are a significant number of different rates. What we're trying to do, because that's the implication of that, is that there are significant differences between how the resource bases are actually funded. What we're trying to do is move to a pattern of a smaller number of categories, and we're currently working through what those categories might look like. Schools have been involved in that discussion. The schools that are involved have been involved in that discussion and will continue to be as that exercise progresses. I think one of the things that we certainly have picked up and recognise is that this exercise has been around for quite some time, even before it started last year. And the whole review of the funding of resource bases has not happened for quite a number of years. So this is a significant exercise. And I think people have seen that it hasn't concluded when we wanted it to. So in terms of timescale, what we're working to at the moment is there is currently an interim arrangement in place that's extended to the end of the current financial year, by which time we hope to have completed, well, we will have completed this financial review, and at that point the new arrangements for resource-based funding will be implemented from the start of the new financial year. And what we will be doing as that exercise is completed is ensuring that we keep Schools Forum aware of what we're doing and what the outcome of the exercise is, to make sure that you're fully aware of what the situation is.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Then if I can, before, I'm presuming our next step might be to move on to special schools. If I can draw a little, let you guys have a little bit of a breath, and turn it over to colleagues and ask if there are questions around this piece that we've just talked around, mainstream and resource base. I'm aware already that I've got several questions that have been sent through to me by email and other forms, asking for greater breakdown and detail of some of these charts. But I'm opening up for colleagues who may have questions around Lynn and Richard's description of mainstream. then I'm going to congratulate both Lynn and Richard. Either that or my IT has gone completely wrong. I can't see a single hand raised. So thank you, colleagues, for that at the moment.
Thank you.
Lynn, thank you, Richard. Thank you, Richard. And Lynn, can I pass back? If I pass back to you, Lynn, is that right? Or Sal, do you want to take in the special schools?
Right, thank you, Catherine. If we can just scroll down to the special schools section. So again, sort of similar format in terms of trying to set out more information, obviously setting out the position both in terms of Wokingham schools around Addington and Chiltern Way, but obviously recognising that the real key interest in terms of a financial context that we've discussed before is obviously around independence and non-maintained. Catherine, if you can scroll down a little bit further, try to give a sense of the overall number of those with EHCPs, the spread across both Wokingham schools, other local authority special schools, and then independent and non-maintained. Again, I'm quite sure that many questions will be on more granular detail of this and how we break that down. We're well aware of that. I suppose today sort of recognises the first step in that journey of then what's useful for us to be able to share in context moving forward. I suppose the big challenge around this is, and again, as we break down into more detail to look at this, is that you know, in terms of that number of 125 individuals, the size of the spend, that actually, if you scroll down, sorry, Catherine, just a little bit further, yeah, when you actually look at it, there is a key group in terms of those top costed ones that account for a significant proportion of the spend. So it's not that every independent and non-maintained special school is at a cost that is not comparable with other settings. It's that there is a number of very expensive ones that drive that cost in particular. And taking those sort of top 15 by cost, we've tried to kind of show there in terms of that spread of key stage and where they sit and what that tells us. And for me, some of the next steps in analysis that we're already underway and that we're following through is that when you see that particular spike, if you like, at the post-16, is for us to ensure that we fully understand, is that because of previous practices and previous approach in terms of working through the system to sit at that age group, or is it about something else that's still happening that means potentially there is another bubble? So effectively, if that bubble works through, have we got the right things in place to minimise a bubble of that size coming through in future? We don't have all the answers to that yet, but there's a number of areas of line that we can keep interrogating the data in conjunction with the needs analysis and the work that's been done on the strategy to ensure that we really clear with that. Catherine, can you scroll down a little bit? Sorry, so that obviously just confirms that. Again, granularity of detail around, and there's some comments in the report around health funding in particular. Social care as well. Social care costs sit under my team and my hat as well. So it's something, again, that in terms of organisationally, how we're making those links across that appropriately. The report alludes to the work that's going on. And again, if there's any particular questions, I'm sure Richard can pick up on that around the discussions with the CCG about ensuring health contributions are there. There's a huge amount of work underway actually about backtracking and looking at cases with health to look at where they have not funded appropriately in the past and go through their panel processes to try and look at that retrospectively where we can. So there's a significant amount of organisational work going around there. But there is no doubt in terms of improvement programme actions within that independent and non-maintained, that's absolutely the key aspect. As we've reflected on before, it's a significant proportion of the overall high needs block spends. It's the part that we feel when we come and we report on changes in the forecast, we're all aware that it's the part that we feel that it moves more than it should, and certainly in comparison to other areas. Catherine, sorry, if you can scroll down just a little section just to the independent section. And actually some of the information in terms of us helping Schools Forum understand information, some of what's become apparent for me when we've worked through that is because we have that slight disconnect between the SEND activity demand and EHCP data and how we hold the financial information, that actually there's better ways we can break that down so that you understand rather than having one big pot of independent and non-maintained? How can we actually break that down into better granular detail in terms of the type of school, and therefore to give a bit of context about what sits underneath that? So that's certainly something that we're building for moving forward. Move on to post-16 colleges.
If I could hold there, please. Again, for colleagues, I've had a couple of questions or emails from colleagues asking for greater detail. I'm sure that's no surprise, Lynn. I'm sure we'll come back to. There may be a question mark around how we're sharing some of those numbers that perhaps don't tie back to individual colleagues' understanding of what the numbers are in their own setting. As you know, this has always been a bugbear of mine, because our this independent sector is 25% of the total high needs block spend in one piece, and this area, and in terms of developing a program to ensure that we get better value for money, whatever that might mean in terms of using our money, is very important. Are there other questions that colleagues may have that we can raise at this time for Lynn and or Richard, I gather? There's definitely something wrong with my IT. It's not showing any hands up in the air. Okay, then thank you, Lynn. Richard, if we can move on to post-16 colleges.
Thank you, Paul. Yep, so again, through a lot of this, it's given us some real good reflection about how we continue to develop financial reporting and the headings that we've had, and how we break that down to show you that in more detail. You know, we've talked about sort of out of borough and post-16 as general headings before, and what we've tried to do here is actually group that into those that are truly sort of further education colleges, placements, etc. in post-16, rather than those that are in the age group of post-16 but in the settings above, if that makes sense. Sorry, Catherine, you scroll down a little bit. So again, just trying to set out, probably some of this is not something that we've looked so much in detail before, in terms of, again, those numbers that are with the HCPs that are in those settings, but then what proportion of those receive top-up funding effectively from the high needs block. Try to give a sense of where those particular settings and colleges are. Catherine, if you don't mind scrolling down a little bit more. Yeah, and then trying to give it a sort of sense of range in terms of the value of individual top-ups, about how the spread of those young people spread over sort of up to 5,000, 5 to 10 and 10,000 and above. In terms of improvement programme actions in that area, thank you, Catherine. In terms of commissioning arrangements, so again, about what as an organisation, how we are planning and commissioning for that in future, and working with those individual settings to ensure that that's more clearly set out, and visibility and understanding of that. And then absolutely about understanding the peak of demand from legislative changes. So we know that in terms of the increase in the cost base over the last few years, as well as the significant increase in the number of children and young people we've had with the HCPs overall, the legislative changes in 2014 and extending the age range up to 25 has meant that we've had more and more cost in that older age group, as there's high needs block responsibility for funding that wasn't there prior to those legislative changes. So again, it's ensuring that we understand when the tail of the legislation has dropped off, if you like, and then it's just the overall demand that continues to drive that increase, and that's something we're keeping under review. Pupil referral.
Oh, hang on a second. Are we comfortable, given the change or the growing importance of this particular piece of the jigsaw, that we've got the skills within the authority to cope with that planning process and understand those issues?
Sonia, I don't know whether that's something you want to pick up on.
Yeah, I do believe we do, actually. We've got post-16 lead within the SEND team, and we've got colleagues that we're working with in social care and the transitions service to look at and interrogate this in more detail. And we're already kind of implementing actions and putting processes in place to better understand and plan for that cohort of young people.
Thank you. Again, colleagues, any questions on the post-16 element of the report? Again, no hands going up. Again, I've got a couple of questions that have been sent to me by email, and I'm sure others may follow later. Great, if we can move on to the pupil referral unit, please.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously, in terms of the information that's there, we've recently kicked off a programme of work with Jay and colleagues at Foundry. Again, we've touched on in Schools Forum before that the funding model for Foundry hasn't been reviewed for some time. This 2021 was the first year in a number of years that we'd even looked to look at for any inflationary factor. And again, in terms of taking forward that review, it was part of the commitment for the programme for this year. We have now kicked that off. As the report sets out, that's not just a finance review as such, but takes on board the 5-year vision that Foundry had set out in conjunction with Sal and Carol to look at actually what we're looking for Foundry to deliver going forward, but ensure that any strategic planning and funding of that are understood and aligned. So obviously that work's just in its infancy, but we will bring more detail back on that as that develops. Catherine, sorry, can you scroll down a little bit? Yeah, so we've obviously that's referred to that in that improvement programme actions that obviously just sets that out, picking up what was in Foundry's 5-year vision and how that work's going to be taken forward.
Have you formalised that with almost like a task and finish group or some other methodology to bring this together? And then I'll come back to Jay.
Yeah, so we've had an initial first meeting, and as part of that, we're setting out exactly what the scope is. So that was with Jay, officers within the council. We were due to meet again next week. We've had to postpone that slightly until the new year, but that will set out in that group who's all going to be involved, what the governance is, what the scope of the work is, etc. Yeah, I don't know whether you want to say any more on that.
Jay?
Could I just query one thing and clarify one thing? On the previous page, there was the mention of 64,000 for outreach, I think it said. I am not actually sure that that's correct. That is what I asked Sal for to respond to a particular crisis, sort of this time last year, and Sal very generously put that money into the Foundry budget so that we could support the problems that were going on in the primary sector. But I wasn't aware that outreach service 64k was anything more than a one-off. So that's one query, if I might, Paul.
Yeah, sure.
And in terms of the, if you could just scroll down, whoever's got the button. In terms of the 5-year vision, my Chair of Governors and I had discussed with Carol and Sal, those points there all have arisen as a result of areas of support and referral that have come our way over the last 4 years whilst I've been head. So in all of those areas, we have been sought to provide support because there isn't anything else out there. And what I'm seeking to do is identify whether there is still the need for those things, and then to formalise how that might be set up and how it might be funded. Just wanted to put that background in on that one.
And Jay, I'm assuming that you and your Chair of Governors and possibly others have the tools and the mechanisms to work with Lynn and Sal and Carol and others to bring this to the table.
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. Lynn, any comment back on the couple of points there that Jay raised?
Just thanks for the added context on the second part. I think the first part, Jay, on the 64, let's pick that up outside the meeting. I think that's just the specifics of that. We can have a chat about that and resolve that for you.
Okay.
Thank you. Can we move on to therapy?
Yeah.
And possibly sense efficiency. So tidy the last couple of pieces in the report.
Yeah, Richard, can I bring Richard back in, please, just on both those items, if that's okay? Thanks, Richard.
Yeah, On therapy, almost all the schools receive support through the CIPIC contract, which we've extended for a further year. And the reason for extending it in its current format is we're in discussion with neighbouring authorities in West Berkshire and Reading, and also with the CCG, to try and get a more integrated approach. So we've set out for over the next year, we're going to be working on the potential for jointly commissioning the new service to try and address the needs of schools across all of the areas, and it's been agreed that Wokingham will lead that's a joint approach. So we've got the neighbouring authorities on board, and we're trying to get the CCG on board. Certainly the initial conversations with them are very supportive of doing that, to try and get a holistic approach, and as part of that we will be seeking views from schools as to exactly what their needs are and whether they are actually being met through the current contract, or whether there are any changes that we need to make to it. So that's over the next year, and again we'll report progress on that as we move forward.
Thank you. Any questions or comments that colleagues would like to raise? No, if we could then move on to the self-sufficiency project.
This is currently in discussion, but we're hoping that approval will be given for this project, and for quite a long time, and it addresses will address quite a number of the areas that we've been talking through, and in particular the excessive spend that we have in the independent sector. What the purpose of this exercise is to look at in a bit more detail than the overarching labels that we obviously all have to use for SEND, but getting into more detail about the specific needs within that, to see whether how currently provision is being accessed, and then what provision is available, and what we need to develop to ensure that we can meet all of those needs over the next 5 years across Wokingham, and ideally in the main within Wokingham. So what this hopefully will result in, and certainly in the proposal for what we're looking at, is reducing the spend in the independent sector, increasing where it's necessary the levels of support that there are to enable our mainstream schools in some cases, our special schools in other cases, and our resource bases to actually deliver other things. And it will also take account of some of the things that Jay was talking about around, is there a need for X, Y, and Z because there isn't anything else? So it would be looking at that as well. So it's the intention is that it takes place over the first half of next year, so sort of January to July, with a view then to very detailed proposals about a long-term and we're thinking 5-year proposal as to what we need to do to get the sufficiency across Wokingham to meet the SEND agenda, but also hopefully to reduce some of the spend that we began the meeting with and the discussion about, particularly because of that high 25% that Paul mentioned around the independent sector. So ideally trying to deliver as much as we can within the borough where that's possible, and what we would need. So the proposal will also include what we would need to actually achieve that. So if that involves building work, for example, that would be included within those proposals. So the intention is there's quite a long detailed proposal at the end of the project, but through the project there would be engagement from all stakeholders, which of course includes schools, and we would work through, once approval's given to the project, we'd work through exactly what that's going to look like and the different elements of how that's going to be achieved over the 6-month period.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking for any comments or questions from colleagues. I can't see anything coming through at the moment. Lynn, you kindly gave us an update on your and your team's ambitions on planning and reporting, data gathering, and the addition of some of the more soft statistics to enhance the transparency of the hard numbers. Is there anything else that you would like to add as we look at pages 25, 6, 7?
I think just briefly to set out, I'm really conscious of time, but I suppose it's it's the continued complexity, I suppose. I mean, Paul, you alluded earlier to Schools Forum, you know, having parts of the jigsaw but not being able to see the overall picture. And I think the complexity of everything that we've spoken about today and the interdependencies of what happens in one part of the system and how that impacts another, it is really the difficulty that we have in terms of being able to get to the point that we've got a really robust financial model that looks past any point in the immediacy of what we know. We tried to set out in the report the particular factors we need to think about for setting the 21-22 high needs block budget. The fact that there is good news that, again, because of obviously central government and DfE decisions, there's a significantly more funding coming into the high needs block. Also sort of recognising, the support from the schools block consultation and that 0.5% of funding that come in that also supports that. But there is no doubt about, when you look at the pressure that we have in year, that we're sort of scraping the surface because of the continued level of the demand that's coming through and the number of individuals that are supported. I'm very much hopeful that the more we can give that, start to link that activity and that finance data, the more that it helps all of our understanding, the more that it helps move our conversations on to the areas that we want to focus on. It's certainly that, the process of preparing for this meeting has been incredibly helpful to my team in terms of how we can look at data in a different way. To report that back. We would love nothing more than to be able to come along in January and give you a really robust 5-year financial model for the high needs block and know with certainty that that's what it looks like. I think it's recognising that it is definitely a work in progress, but the more that we can help share understanding of that and ensure that there's clear visibility over the assumptions that have been made behind the figures, that I think is where if we can all working together, I think we've made improvements in that, but we can continue to develop on that.
Thank you. Again, colleagues, looking across, before we move back onto the strategy part of the report and perhaps touch on that in a little more detail, I appreciate we're running a little short of time. Are there any further questions that you think it would be helpful to ask the team on this call now, or are you comfortable that with email to me and the other colleagues that I talked about briefly at the start of the meeting, we can ask the questions that we need to? Again, I'm looking for virtual hands being raised and can't see any. So if we can then, Sal, with your guidance and perhaps Matthew's input, move on to, and although Matthew, your description right at the beginning I thought was quite detailed anyway, but if we could just take back to the strategic part.
So in terms of the next element of the document that you have there, the paper, so from page 29 onwards, again, what that does is it gives a more detailed overview to that which I gave a précis to earlier in terms of the current arrangements in terms of our work or across the written statements of action. So again, that's there. It's part of this is a report that we send through to the Department for Education as part of our ongoing review, so that colleagues in School Forum are getting exactly the same information in the same way that it's presented to our colleagues in the DfE, so that you can see what we are sharing with them, both in terms of what we've been able to achieve, but also the areas that we are continuing to work on. So again, hopefully colleagues have had an opportunity to read through those pages, and then, of course, Matthew has already taken us through in terms of the SEND strategy. I think, Paul or Chair, I'm more than happy for us to take questions now or comments now, rather than us continue to present information to you now in that way. And of course, as you articulated right at the start, we are more than happy to try and answer any questions that colleagues have in the immediacy. There are likely to be a proportion of those questions that will need to go away and collate the responses for you so that we can provide a written response after this meeting. And there may be questions that you pose that actually I would suggest it's up to all of us to work together to find the answers to. There will be those sorts of questions as well. As you say, or as I've heard you say, as you've been going along, people have been emailing questions to you as well. So no doubt after this meeting, hopefully you'll be able to send me a bundle of those questions and say, Sal, these are the things that have cropped up. Can we draft the responses to them? But I do want to make sure that, I mean, I know we've gone on for quite a period of this meeting. I do want to make sure that if there are any particularly urgent comments that colleagues want to make, they have the opportunity to do so.
Okay, thank you, Sal. Again, I'm looking for virtual hands. Just so that I can get this in my own mind, I think I'm recalling Matthew's comment that you're about to enter a period of consultation around the strategy. So not only does the group on the call, but others as well have the opportunity to contribute to that consultation.
Absolutely.
And we can provide a, let's call it a parallel channel where we funnel probably more detailed questions through back into yourselves as well.
Yeah.
If with that comment, has anybody got any questions they'd like to raise specifically on the strategy that they haven't already raised on email or aren't going to be able to share with me in the next time? I'm not seeing anybody's hands raised at the moment.
I would hope, as Matthew outlined, that colleagues have been kept abreast of the development of the strategy, because it has been co-produced. So in terms of the task and finish group that's been working on it, and in terms of members that have represented the school sector within the SIB as well. So hopefully colleagues feel that they have been able to engage in the development of it thus far to its final draft version prior to the full formal consultation, which of course everybody is more than welcome to further add comments or contribute to, so that we can get to a final position hopefully by the end of January. And as Matthew says, really move forward with implementation.
Okay, thank you. Then we're 10 to 2. I'd just quickly like to run down and check with colleagues that they've had the opportunity to say what they want to do or understand how they can feed things back. Just a reminder again that if Ginny could capture from any secondary heads and leaders their feedback or questions and funnel those back through to me. Brian, if you could do the primary and lower age groups. Karina, welcome to, I appreciate you. You always said you were going to join slightly late. Perhaps Brian and Karina, between the two of you, given the volume of primary and younger age feedback. Sarah, for the more expert directly SEN related areas, again, if you capture feedback through to me, and obviously anybody, please, if you would like to write directly to me, please do. I'll capture everything. We will then work on collating all of that information, separating it into those 3 areas: immediate, written response, and feedback into the strategy. Share that back with Sal, Carol and the team, and look for probably a written report back. Based upon that, let's decide how we move forward, whether it's another meeting, whether it's a task and finish group, whether we reabsorb high needs block back into the main school forum meetings. I'm hoping that's an acceptable way for us to take the project forward. And if I can then just use the last minute or two and sort of just wander down, I'll ask you if you've got any, if you have, please just open your microphone and say so. Carol Simpson, I'm just going down the list I've got on my screen. I'm hoping everything's okay with you.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz?
Yep.
Yeah, hopefully Karina. Thank you.
Sorry, all good, thanks, Paul.
Ali?
All good,
Yeah.
thanks.
Ginny?
Yes, thank you. I can confirm we'll gather the information from Secondary Federation.
Lovely, thank you. Sarah?
Yes, thanks.
Brian?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you.
Jay?
Thank you, Paul. Sent you some notes.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, great. Luciana, we okay?
Yes, all okay, thank you.
Thank you. Catherine?
Thank you. Nothing for me.
Emma?
All fine, thank you.
Shirley?
Thank you. I have some points which I'll feedback from this morning's meeting and this afternoon in line with Ginny through Federation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Lynn?
Nothing from me. Thank you, Paul.
Sean?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of things probably that will go best back through Federation. I'll leave that with the co-heads.
Excellent. Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, similar. We'll feedback via the Federation, so it's collective, and then there's not various different messages.
Hello, Sandy. Hello.
Okay. Hi, Sandy. So thank you all for the colleagues, Richard and Matthew and Sonia and Callum. I hope I haven't missed anybody else off, Dan, etc. Thank you all very much for supporting Sal and Carol on this extensive call. To Carol, Sal and the rest of the team, thank you very much for the documentation. Stunning step forward. I genuinely feel that we are starting to see the picture of this jigsaw, and look forward to working with you to make sure that we get a better understanding of how those jigsaw pieces fit together and the implications they have on the financing of high needs block. Carol, I can see, I'm hoping you're going to make a nice little comment at the end as well, please. I can see your hand raised.
Yes, so I was just going to say thank you to everybody on the call, because it's been a bit of a mammoth kind of task, and well done, Paul, for kind of sharing in a really effective way. We genuinely do want to make a difference for our country. That is our only mantra. So please don't think that there's anything that can get in the way of this, because there shouldn't be. We just need to work together and be. Of course, we will be. We'll have to bottom out off the issues together. That's the nature of our business. But I do hope that you have a sense that we are absolutely doing everything we can. And yes, it's difficult and it takes time, but our intentions are to make improvements for children. That's our only goal, really. So any help and support that you can give us, of course, any challenges is welcome, and we will feed all of that into a final product. But I do think we have made some really good steps forward. That does not take away from the challenges that we know we have ahead. So I just wanted to, end on that really and say thank you to everybody for all of your time this morning. Well, this afternoon now.
Thank you, Carol. I can have my thanks to everybody joining us as well. It's been an intense, but I think a very good start along the little journey that we're making. And I hope you've also felt that it's been good use of your time. So a big thank you from me. Wish you all a very Merry Christmas. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and look forward to speaking to you and seeing your emails and feedback over the next period of time. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Paul.